Okay, 6-part video, 6 steps to cinematic 6400 video. Crop, set, grid, blur, move, grade. Done. So let's go. Step number 1, crop. Most everything you see these days is 16:9. And that's fine if you don't care or you're going TV movie. But the big boys we admire, they go to 35:1. Good old Cinemascope. You can do that in post, just get some letterbox templates, drag them onto your footage, and you're done. And for your convenience, there's a download link to all the templates you will need in the video description. It is a simple step, but it makes a huge difference. Very important though, shoot with the aspect ratio. Set up your shot using it, because you can tell very easily if something is framed 16:9 and then just lazy boxed in post. The easiest way to go with the 6400 is to enter the menu, second main menu, third submenu, option number 3, marker display. Turn that on. Option 4, marker settings, aspect. Last option, 235:1, done. To have even more control over the image, you can use a field monitor that features different aspect ratio overlays. So if you're intending to shoot a lot of cinematic stuff, keep a decent field monitor in the back of your mind as a possible investment in the future. Step number 2, settings. What settings do we use? Frames per second, 24, is the classic choice, of course. Why? Because that's what most movies use, and that's what we are used to. Would we call 30 frames per second cinematic if they had used 30? Yes. But they didn't, so it's 24. PAL shooters beware, no 24 frames per second option in PAL mode, only 25 frames per second. You will get away with using 25, don't worry. However, should you want to go 24, here's how to do it. 5th main menu, 2nd submenu, 6th option, NTSC PAL selector. The camera will ask you to format your SD card before switching, so make sure to use a fresh one or back up your data beforehand. And once you're in NTSC mode, you will get the 24 frames per second option. Shutter speed. Double the frame rate. 24 or 25 frames per second means 1/50th for a shutter speed. Why? Natural motion blur. Now I am on the record multiple times saying I do not care for shutter speed because for what I do, I don't have to. Natural looking motion blur is none of my concerns whatsoever when I'm in front of a motionless camera being almost motionless myself. I will shoot 1/4000th of a second and just not give a f. Having said that, right now we're talking movies, movement. On the big screen, usually either the frame moves or something inside the frame moves, or both. And as you have motion, you need natural motion blur. Otherwise, people will feel that there is something wrong, and that will take their attention away from the story and direct it towards the medium itself, which should only function as the transmitter, not as an agent itself. In other words, the immersive process isn't as complete as it could be. Doubling the frames per second with the shutter speed will get you correct motion blur. 60 frames per second, 1/125th of a second, 120 frames per second, 1/250th of a second, and so on. Which lenses to use? Super wide angles are cool if you're doing a music video. Be careful though not to overuse them. They work for landscapes, architecture, wide open spaces. That's it. Because we are not used to the distorted field of view of a super wide angle lens when it comes to interior shots or close-ups. Again, what we're trying to do is insert pre-manufactured, pre-edited, premeditated visual experience into people's brains. That only works if we're drawing attention away from the fact that we're using a completely superficial medium to do it. That's why we go for lenses that don't distort and do not have an unnaturally wide viewing angle. For wide shots, establishing shots for example, landscape, architecture, on APS-C we're going 16mm, which is a 24mm full frame equivalent. That's it. Most of what you do though will be medium shots, 24 to 35mm on APS-C, 35 to 50mm being the full frame equivalent. That look most closely resembles the way we see the world, both in terms of our own field of view, talking about the part that we can actually attend to, and spatial compression, the relation between the size of foreground, midground and background subjects. Any kind of details, that's 56 to 70mm on APS-C. the full frame equivalent being roughly 85 to 100 millimeters, which is widely recognized as the most flattering millimeter range for faces, but obviously also works for any other kind of close-up shot. By the way, I do know there are more shots than wide, medium and close-up, but this is not an online course, this is a YouTube video. So I am keeping things simple to get the concept across, not explore in comprehensive detail. Hands down, the best cinematic lenses out there for the 6400 are the f1.4 Sigmas, 16-30 and 56 millimeters. Considering the price and the quality, it's really a no contest. Other great options are the Sony 24mm f1.8 and the Sony 35mm f1.8. And of course, the 50mm f1.8. Picture profile / dynamic range. It's a battle for the highlights. On-frame light sources and bright sun-flooded windows are game, but that's usually it. Why? Our eyes are still way ahead of any camera system. I was taught back in the day that a healthy eye can distinguish 32 stops of dynamic range. We are not used to blown out highlights, is what I'm saying. Here's what we can do. You don't want to grade or you don't know how, at least you can select the right creative style. First main menu, 11th submenu, 4th option, creative style. Not standard, but neutral. Click right on the click wheel once and further decontrast to save more highlight detail and bring up the shadows a bit. Bring up the saturation a bit too, by 1, to compensate for the decontrasting a little. And completely de-sharpen because you want to be able to adjust sharpness in post if necessary. Next option is HLG HDR video. Main menu 1, submenu 11, 6th option, picture profile. Select picture profile 10, it is HLG1 BT 2020. Next option, S-Log 2 or 3. That is profile 7 for S-Log 2 or profiles 8 or 9 for S-Log 3. S-Log 3 is in my opinion the best way to save your highlights from clipping. When shooting log or HDR, you can use the Gamma Display Assist feature of the 6400 to simulate a more natural look on the display. 5th main menu, 1st submenu, 4th option, Gamma Display Assist. Just pick the one that fits. These assist functions tend to overdo it with the saturation. That is just the assist feature, you will still record regular log or HDR footage. Very important, do not set your white balance according to what you see on the display using the Gamma Display Assist feature. Just don't. Use white balance cards and fine-tune in post. More on that in a moment. Next up, exposure. It needs to be right. There you have it, let's move on. No, just kidding. This is all about assist functions. So here are the two that are the most useful. Number 1, zebras. Zebras show you clipping highlights via an overlay. Incredibly useful. Here's how to set them up. 2nd main menu, 6th submenu, 4th option, zebra settings. Zebra display on. Zebra level, now there's different opinions out there. Me personally, I like zebras to show up only if the sensor reads 100% white, no details left. If you want to be more cautious than myself, use a lower level, like 95 or 90 for example. Very important point, when shooting HLG HDR video with the 6400, for some reason, zebras do not show up unless they're set to a level of 90 or lower, in which case I recommend you set them to a level of 90. Because if you set it to 95 or 100, they do not show up at all, and you are running the risk of significantly overexposing your HDR footage. So, when using HLG HDR video, set your zebras to a level of 90, and then just use them like you would if you were shooting log and they were set at a level of 100. I do it like this all the time, and I've never run into problems exposing my HDR footage this way. Now, second assist function, the histogram. Here's how to set it up and use it. Main menu number 2, submenu number 6, option 1, display button. Monitor, and there check the box for histogram. Now, when you toggle the display modes, clicking up on the click wheel, you will get a histogram. What you want from a histogram is an even distribution, neither a right nor a left-leaning distribution. For standard creative styles, this is what a correct distribution looks like. For HDR and log footage, this is what it should look like. So when in doubt, keep the highlights, let the shadows drop, On-screen lights and live lighted windows are game, use zebras, use the histogram, and nail your exposure. Next up, white balance. There's different ways to do it. With the 6400 especially, here's what I suggest you do. Get one of those white balance cards, 18% gray, white and black. Use auto white balance, but immediately after hitting record, lock the white balance. Then record the cards for a couple of seconds at the beginning of every shot and place them right where the main subject is inside the frame. If light hits your main subject, light has to hit the cards for this to work. Then, in post-production, in your editing software, simply pick your blacks, whites and midtones, and that will give you a correct white balance and a neutral start to grade from. Here's how you set the auto white balance lock function. Second main menu, 8th submenu, second option, custom key for video. Rare 2, number 1, middle of the click wheel. Select auto white balance lock toggle. Now to wrap up step number 2, settings, let me make one point that is probably obvious by now to most of you. We are shooting in manual movie mode. Everything is set manually or locked once we hit record. With a cinematic shot, everything that can be under your control needs to be at all times. So to complete this, our goal also is to always keep the ISO as low as possible to get the cleanest image possible. Always strive for 100 and do not push above 1600, period. Now step number 3, the grid. Grid really is a flashier word than composition in my opinion, only one syllable fits the pattern better, so with grid what we're actually talking about is composition. Composition is easy. It's just a matter of doing it over and over and over again so your eye gets used to it. Here's 5 easy ways to control your composition. Number 1, shot size. Do you want to show a landscape, a subject in relation to a landscape, a subject in relation to one of its details, or a detail? Basically, how wide or narrow does the shot have to be to transmit the desired information in the best way? Number 2, angle. Up angle, subject becomes more important. Down angle, subject becomes less important. Straight, neutral position. Dutch angle, the world out of balance. Use with caution. If things do go haywire in the story, a Dutch angle might be the right way to go. However, do not overuse Dutch angles. Watch Battlefield Earth if you don't trust me on that one. Number 3, be aware of foreground, midground and background. Realizing that a lot of times there are these 3 layers to a shot will enable you to create depth and control space, as well as reduce those visual properties when needed. Number 4, a classic, the rule of thirds grid. 2 vertical, 2 horizontal lines. These are usually where you put your horizon or your subject. Nothing is set in stone, but these lines are a great starting point to begin thinking about the position of your subject and composition in general. Number 5, leading lines. Check the location for leading lines, naturally occurring or in architecture for example. Then use them to direct attention towards your subject or away from it, depending on your needs. So, shot size, camera angle, foreground, midground, background, rule of thirds, leading lines. Step number 4, blur. Next to a Cinemascope crop, a blurred out background is the most common hallmark of a cinematic shot. There's really not much more to it than using a fast lens that allows you to blur the background to further direct attention towards what's important inside the frame. As a rule of thumb, the lower the f.stop value of a lens and the higher its millimeter value, the more background blur it can deliver. Best combo for maximum background blur, therefore, is a combination of low f.stop value and high millimeters. Now, since high millimeters means less viewing angle and because shot size is more important than background blur, you will have to compromise in some situations. Again, the Sigmas rule supreme with their f1.4 aperture. With a 16mm Sigma, you're getting a decently wide shot while still being able to blur the background a little, while the 30mm f1.4 will allow you to blur the background a lot. And the 56mm f1.4 will top even that. Important, you will need an ND filter to shoot that wide open during the day. For beginners, I suggest a decent variable ND2 to 400, 2 to 8 stops. Set your shutter speed, set your frames per second, set your ISO to the lowest possible value, and see where that gets you. Then reduce the incoming light step by step using the ND filter until your zebras and your histogram tell you that the exposure is correct. Step number 5. Move. And that's a big one. Movies are movies because they move. Either something inside the frame moves, or the camera moves, or both. If nothing moves, you better have a good reason for it, because people tend to get very itchy very fast if nothing moves for no reason other than a lack of creativity or laziness. Use whatever you have at your service, even if all you have is a completely non-stabilized system and nothing but your hands. Hold your camera tight, tuck your elbows, and move from your legs and hips, keeping the torso still. Then use digital stabilization inside your editing software. Frame a little wider because that kind of stabilization crops into the image to give you a smoother shot. But the shot itself will look much nicer. Shooting 120 frames per second and ramping up the internal camera sharpening will get you nice, decently sharp slow motion and help with smoothing out the shot. Then of course, sliders, gimbals, steadicams are at your service if you want to get moving. Bend your knees, walk on the front of your feet, go flashlight mode. Do whatever you can to compensate for up and down movement. The dumber you look walking a gimbal or a steadicam, the better the results. I will be the proud owner of a Steadicam in the near future. Until then, a great gimbal for the 6400 is the Zhiyun Crane Plus. It can easily handle the camera with any Sigma on there, and even using the camera with a battery grip is no problem. Mighty fine gimbal, great work by Zhiyun, very easy to recommend. Step number 6. Grade. With cinematic shots, nothing is left to chance. Make sure you put time into the grade. Decide what emotion you want to convey and give your footage another edge to stand out. Maybe a nice color contrast, maybe a punchy, dirty look, even a decently corrected black and white style can be exactly what the doctor ordered. And even if you start out with presets, doesn't matter. Just take in as many different visual ideas and concepts as possible to develop your own taste and down the road your own style. So these were my 6 steps to cinematic 6400 footage. All of these steps are under your control no matter what. So to wrap this up, here's a couple of things that may or may not play to your advantage. Lighting. If you can set up lights, set up lights. Create nice contrasts on your subject, the fore, mid and background if possible. The less flat an image, usually the more engaging it is visually. If you're working with natural light, wait for the right weather, because the right light can make all the difference in the world. Also, be aware of what's called golden hour, which is usually the 2-hour window after sunrise and before sunset. The light then has a warmer color tone, is softer than during noon, a low sun makes for nice shadows, and you can shoot scenes backlit by the sun itself. Also immensely important, location, location, location. Take some time to research your locations. Plan a trip, plan your shots. Seriously, a great location and a structured shot list can make it virtually impossible to shoot bad footage. Alright, so what we call cinematic, I believe, is a certain aesthetic that originates in an idea that then is expressed visually and artistically. The aim of art is to communicate. Art is a language. In cinema, every shot is a statement, and the more eloquent the formulation of that statement, the more cinematic the shot. Crop, set, grid, blur, move, great. And that's that video. If you liked it, if you found it helpful, please make sure to leave a thumbs up, it's greatly appreciated. Any kind of comment or feedback is welcome, and I'll try to answer as quickly as possible. All the tech that I've used in this video is linked in the description. As always, thank you so much for your time, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you again soon.